All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So this session is called Leading Outside the Lines, Shaping Leaders for System Change. And I'm the moderator, Maria Nurkia, one of the co-founders of the Center for Community Investment, which is kind of pulling together this panel. And joining me today are Adrienne Bond-Harris, Stephanie Tyree, and Albert Walker, who are all leaders in their communities, but also are Fulcrum Fellows, which is one of the leadership programs that we have developed at the Center for Community Investment. We're actually in our 4th cohort, and I think we have somebody from cohort 1, cohort 2, or cohort 3 joining us. And so what we're going to be talking about is leadership and what it takes to take up leadership for system change on behalf of racial equity. So that's the deal. We're going to go to a second slide. So I can just tell you just a tiny little bit about everybody. So as I said, I'm one of the co-founders of CCI, but I'm also a consultant. My company is called Strategy Lift. Adrienne Bond-Harris, who has had many leadership roles and is now an entrepreneur and leading her own consulting firm called Harco Consulting. Albert is a program and strategy officer at Richmond Memorial Health Foundation. And Stephanie Tyree is executive director at the West Virginia Community Hub. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about CCI, so we're going to go to the next slide, and I'm going to tell you specifically about this framework that we use that we call the capital absorption framework. And that next slide, Justin, if you would. So we founded the Center for Community Investment about 5 years ago as an effort to change community investment in the US to focus more on systems change for racial equity. And we use something we call the capital absorption framework, which looks at community development from kind of 3 strands: shared priorities, what does a community want for itself? What are the community leaders committed to achieving? A pipeline, what are all the different projects, activities, and programs that people are trying to move through to completion? An enabling environment, what is the policy surround? What are the relationships? What is the data? What are the funding flows that make those projects possible in order to achieve the shared priorities? And what we really work on is working concurrently across aligning shared priorities, organizing and moving a pipeline, and defining an enabling environment agenda to really move systems change. Community investment here in the US mostly happens on a project by project basis, and each project is like really hard to do. So the theory, the hypothesis is if people come together in a cross-sector leadership mode, that they can work together to shape and give coherence to the community investment agenda. And what we have made a commitment to as a center is to really invest in leadership as one of the primary, if not the primary strategy for moving community investment for racial equity. So we're going to be talking about that leadership journey that makes system change possible. And first, I'm going to have folks introduce themselves. So we can pause the slide deck for a second. Great. And just going to invite Adrienne and Albert and Stephanie to say a little bit about who they are and what their work is. So over to you guys.
So you name me first, so I'll go first. I'm Adrienne Harris with Harco Consulting.
I might have to go second so that we can keep going.
Oh, okay. Should I keep going? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I have been working in community development, community investment for the last almost 20 years, which is crazy to say. And I am now consulting and working with many organizations, public entities, and really figuring out community engagement, the intersection between community engagement and community investment. So before going into consulting, I was working with the Center for Community Investment, working on a national housing initiative with JP Chase and really figuring out how to create equitable housing solutions in 6 places across the country. And so I've really worked in place-based and national initiatives, and was also a part of the Fulcrum Fellowship and Phil Catalyst leadership programs with CCI. So definitely have learned a lot and have been on the front lines for CCI as well. So I'll turn it over to whoever wants to go next.
I think I was next. Albert Walker. I'm in Richmond, Virginia. So right now, I am the program and strategy officer at the Richmond Memorial Health Foundation. But my journey is a storied one. I started my career at a nonprofit in the East End of Richmond. A Black neighborhood in Richmond that's rapidly gentrifying. As of today, started that work shortly after I got out of college. Then I found myself doing social determinants of health work at a research institution here, working with everyday ordinary people and academic researchers for community-based participatory research. Then I found myself in corporate healthcare, doing community health work. And now I'm in health philanthropy. And so it's been an interesting and storied journey along the way. I entered Fulcrum. It's interesting. I entered while I was at Bonsicle Health System, and now made the switch midway through my Fulcrum Fellowship. And so be happy to talk about the shift that happened there for me in the work. Stephanie?
Sure. Happy to be with everyone today. I'm Stephanie Tyree, the Executive Director of the West Virginia Community Development Hub. I'm based out of rural West Virginia. I actually live just on the edge of the newest national park, the New River Gorge National Park. And I have been with the Hub for the past 10 years, also having that, I'm getting into decades of this work experience. My background is in law and policy. So I started at the Hub as the policy director, starting a community-based policy program, and then came into the executive director role about 7 years ago. And the Hub is a statewide nonprofit that works with rural communities across the state, working with local community teams to help them identify projects and strategies to improve their communities, and to, just like CCI, really focus on leadership development as the core strategy for that, and trying to work through a long-term relationship with those communities for improvement. One of the core mission approaches of the Hub is to catalyze the community development field in West Virginia and think about community development as a system. So it really fits well within the CCI approach. We're always challenging ourselves and our partners to think about what are systemic barriers and opportunities that we could take advantage of if we were thinking on a more strategic and systemic level. And so we'll get into more talk about what that some of those things looked like, but it really was a very clear fit with CCI's approach and the Hub's way of thinking. I came into CCI actually through a program before the Fulcrum Fellowship with a new regional investment fund that was being started up called Invest Appalachia. And hi, Marianne. Really got introduced to CCI through my partnership trying to start up that investment fund, which is actually just completed its first close, and we'll be making an exciting public announcement soon. But then I got pulled into the leadership development program with the Fulcrum Fellowship, and it's really taken my work to a whole nother level and has been incredibly valuable.
I gather that you all introduced yourselves while I was trying not to cry, and I like to go all the way back out and get the code and restart the computer. So hi, thank you so much for that. So just to make up time and keep going, I'm actually going to skip the rest of the presentation. We're just going to talk. And what we're talking about is what it takes to kind of lift up your head from your own work and your own organization or your own program, and really take a look at the ecosystem kind of beyond the walls, outside the lines, and really take up your leadership for larger system change. And so what I thought we would do is just talk about what that was like for you all, what it was like to really pick up leadership for system change, to really locate yourself not as a leader in your organization, but in the ecosystem, and what that transition was for you. And I know, Stephanie, for you, maybe we'll start with you, because of the work in Appalachia and the work to kind of really bring a progressive framework to work in Appalachia. You had already been working kind of at an ecosystem level, but you really took it even a step further in terms of the leadership you were taking at the ecosystem level. So maybe just start talking, and then we'll go to Albert and Adrian.
Yeah, I'll just briefly kind of give an example of our work in Appalachia and in West Virginia. So the hub didn't start working specifically on rural downtown redevelopment. And by that, I mean building development projects and like large scale, multi-use development projects. But because of what communities needed, because of local interest and drive, those were always the projects that ended up coming up. And so we were ending up kind of trying to help communities tackle these large scale projects because there was nobody else doing them, because they wanted to revitalize their main streets and downtowns, and there wasn't the ecosystem actors that were needed to do that. So literally local volunteers were trying to do that. And we found that in our coaching programs and our community development programs, it's felt like we were taking communities to a cliff of services where we would build up their leadership, build up their capacity. They would actually take on ownership of these buildings and these projects and then not know how to do them. And every project was taking 10 years or more to complete. It was very difficult. So we started thinking about it not as a project by project problem, but a systems problem. And with the support of CCI, honestly, we started to really understand who were the actors in the system, what were the parts of the system, and where were the gaps and the barriers. And in West Virginia, what we identified was we had a critical gap around community development corporations or community-based real estate developers. Projects that communities wanted to work on, they weren't profitable enough to attract regular developers, and there weren't CDCs. So my role in this process was not a technical expert. It was really just like a convener and someone that was a weaver in a lot of ways, trying to lift up what I was hearing from a lot of people across the state and then across the region, get them together, manage egos so people didn't feel like there was competitiveness in new approaches that we were trying to do, and appreciate the work that had come before and the innovations and experimentation that had identified some useful ways to work within our own context. And so just this year, we finally got a shared agreement to take a direct strategy to stand up CDCs across the whole state in a way that's competitive with the current ones, but builds on their models and success. So a lot of like the success that we found has been really managing that sense of scarcity and competitiveness, and getting people to feel brave enough to take on a shared strategy that feels maybe bigger than what we can do individually.
So it sounds like you mapped sort of what was going on. You were able to kind of get what we call in our world a balcony view, right? Building on the work of around Heifetz and adaptive leadership. So get a balcony view and really look at what was going on the dance floor and be like, oh, there's the gap. And then organize the leadership to say, like, egos aside, that's a big gap. We need to deal with that or nothing's going to move. And then figure out how to start to fill that gap. That's big leadership. What was that like for you?
So it was scary because I'm not a developer and I don't have the financial expertise to do the projects, but I had to sort of accept at a certain point that wasn't really what I needed to do or the role I needed to hold in the system. And I kept looking for somebody else to do what I was doing or what the hub was doing, and no one else. Everyone was very comfortable with me doing it and okay with me doing it. And part of it was because we've spent a long time building trust across partners, lots of giving away credit and building, strong long-term relationships. And so people felt like they knew who I was and they trusted me to not put them at risk. And then the other thing that was sort of challenging about it was it just takes so much patience and time. I mean, I can't tell you about the hundreds of conversations that have gone into this. And when we look back on it, it's been like 6 years of work, you know? And so probably at the start of 6 years ago, if I had known the process, I would have felt very overwhelmed at how much time and patience it was going to take. But it's been very exciting, and it feels like we've kind of jumped up a level in what we're able to do together.
I love that. So let's hear from Adrian and Albert, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about kind of what made it possible to take those leaps. So Adrian and Albert, either one.
Go ahead, Albert.
Yeah, what made it possible? You know, I think
not the what made it. Tell us about the leap, and then we'll come back around and talk about the what made it possible.
Okay, tell us about the leap. So I think for me, thinking about the ecosystem first, just realizing that I'm a part of an ecosystem. You know, I think when I came into Fulcrum, I was very my lens was pretty narrow in terms of the way that I view. I wouldn't even say a system. I was just looking very granular at a programmatic level, and quite honestly, very linearly. I think the process of unlearning, you know, or learning about systems and how, you know, you have a role in a system, and to actually locate yourself in the system was real eye-opening for me. Because then it caused me to really examine, you know, how I might show up and how I wanted to operate, and then how I wanted to move in the system. I think the biggest thing that, you know, I learned over the time of Fulcrum, and still learning, is that, you know, you all used to always talk about boundaries, authority, roles, and tasks. I was like, oh my God, what are they talking about? But you know, when you want to talk about, you know, leading outside the lines and what made the shift possible, sometimes you have to potentially change your role in the system. So if Richmond is my ecosystem, you know, for what I needed to get done and for the work that I needed to get done, I actually had to move positions. And so move out of like a programmatic role to more of a systems role. And so, you know, I physically, professionally had to move within my system to kind of move the system in the way that I wanted to get done. And so quite frankly, what my end goal has been and continues to be is to figure out how that, you know, everyday ordinary people in communities, Black and brown communities in Richmond, Virginia, can get access to untapped capital. So that could be in Richmond, it could be, you know, trying to figure out how to get capital improvement dollars into their neighborhoods through participatory budgeting. So we did a little bit of work in that on a policy side. But right now, you know, with COVID, we had to make a big shift. And so now we're just working with Black and brown organizations, place-based organizations, and policy organizations to kind of look at some of the systems, because COVID really showed us a whole nother, it just shone a bright light on, you know, some of the policies and the systems that and so it has we have an opportunity now to move in a new way. So I think learning that I was a part of a system, understanding that sometimes I might have to move in that system. But then I think that the other hardest part was, you know, sometimes you're in a role in an institution, and then helping them to see that they're a part of this. You know, I think the hardest thing about getting this kind of training is that sometimes you might be the only one who understands it. So it's really good to be able to be in a network of other folks who get it. And I think being a part of a network was really helpful as well.
So I think this piece about like recognizing that you had this line of sight, this kind of impact that you were trying to make through your work over your life, right? So it was the work, not the job,
Right.
And that you realize like, oh, I can't do that work from this job. I need to
Right.
get me another job where I
Right.
can really do this work, this long haul work that I'm committed to as a Richmondite.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And that's always been it, and that's what it could continue to be. And so right now I'm on a regional systems level, whereas at one point I was just at a very granular East End community level. But then there's the complexity, right? So the complexity gets harder as you get wider in the ecosystem. And so in learning how to lead and manage that takes another level of chops that if y'all have a Fulcrum 2.0, I need to come to.
I do. Adrian, go ahead, and then we'll come back and talk about, so tell us sort of what the leap looked like for you or is looking like for you. And then let's come back and really talk about like, what are the skills and the mindsets that really have helped you all do this? So go ahead, Adrian.
Yeah, so I want to talk about the leap that got me into the Fulcrum Fellowship program. I was working in the mayor's office as the director of housing at the time, and I wanted to take things in a different way. First of all, it was the first time that there was a director of housing in a mayor's office.
In Nashville?
In Nashville, I forgot to say Nashville, Tennessee. The South is represented today.
Yes.
So yes, I was in Nashville leading this housing work, and I had been doing this work, like I said, for a while. And I recognized through the fellowship that what I was doing was really leading transaction to transaction. That I was in the public sector mindset of if I can just get 50 units, check, I've done what I was supposed to do with these federal programs, and I'm done. And that was it. And I think being a part of the fellowship was an opportunity, like Albert said, and like Stephanie said, of seeing yourself in the system and how you can really help and support other leaders to support that momentum. Because I think what I was saying was that I was just working on this particular program. I was very granular. And then it took some of this, Marianne always coaches me on this, of chunking the work. Because I was like, I want to get to 5,000 units by this certain time. But you can't do that unless you chunk the work and know exactly what might need to happen. And it could be in different ways. It might be that you need to have one-on-one conversations with these certain groups, but then you may need to have a group conversation with the Black developers in Nashville. So it was a very important time for me personally and professionally, because I was in this role. And it was a role that I never imagined that I would be in. And then while I was in the fellowship, I also had another shift that allowed me to think beyond Nashville and think about how I could be a public servant, I guess, on a national level. So while I was in the mayor's office, there was a scandal. And so I was able to move away from what was happening on that, local level to really think about what I wanted to do personally and what was grounding me in the work. So I had to do a lot of searching for what it is that brought me into the community development and affordable housing space. And that now is leading me into this work of what's really important for me and how can I make sure that I'm giving my best to the field of community investment. Mm-hmm. So that's the leap. I can't remember this.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. We're good. We're good. Many leaps. Many leaps. So, the three of you are leaders of color working in the South or the near South. And I guess I'm wondering, like, what's it like to be a person of color taking up systems leadership? Because that's not, really when you go up from local to city to regional, it gets wider and wider and wider. We see that nationally. And so what's it like for you as leaders of color to be really championing a systems change agenda and to be systems leader? What's that like? What does it call for you?
That's a big question. I'm going to say therapy, a network. I mean, so I like I said, I started the conversation in terms of, I started my work in a nonprofit. And in many ways, I have been tutored by Richmond Philanthropy. And now I'm a part of Richmond Philanthropy. And there were, there are two schools of thought. There's charity based and then there's strategic, right? Our foundation is shifting to a strategic way to do investments to advance health and racial equity. Of all the years in my relationship with philanthropy and enrichment, it wasn't that. And so to unlearn that, that's tough. And then, some of us have experienced trauma in these systems. And so learning how to navigate those kinds of events while being in it, is a whole nother ball of wax. So I think, having a network of peers that you can talk to, other leaders who are going through a similar experience, but there's something powerful about being a part of a network, and I think I love that. The beauty of Fulcrum is because in many ways I was just talking to folks in my town and in my city, but this gave me an opportunity to network with people from across the country. So
Albert, what makes it tough to unlearn that charity systems, charity strategy frame? Like, what make that hard to unlearn? What was tough about that?
I mean, I think a lot of it is just layered, right? So when you think about a charity mindset, we're in the South. Some of that is layered with like religious idea. I mean, it's layered here. It's deep, and there's so many layers to it that to kind of peel it back, it can take. It's like going through a rigorous graduate program. If you've been to school and you really been to school, it puts a number on you. I think the difficult part of it is that once you learn a way of doing things, to unlearn that, it takes discipline, it takes practice, it takes failing. It takes a lot to.
Did you enjoy the failing?
Did I enjoy it? No, no, not at all. That's layer two. I mean, when you think about, you always have to be the best and try to be the, and try to.
I mean, that's sort of that's I think that one of the points of tension and contradiction, right? Is that as people of color, we have to overperform to be accepted, and then here you are out here taking risks and experimenting, like, that feels very contradictory at some level.
Right. I mean, I think the beauty of like some of the leadership is learning how to adapt, right? Yeah. Like, it's not a failure. It's about really getting on the balcony and really saying, okay, what is happening here? And then when you have that kind of lens, it's not necessarily a failure. You begin to start saying, oh, well, this is what it is. You can diagnose.
Can you give an example of going to the balcony and seeing that it wasn't a failure, but an adaptation?
Yeah, so absolutely. We got a network of place-based Black and Brown leaders. We had this idea that we were going to have cross-pollination between Black and Brown communities in Richmond. We connected them with a policy partner, and we thought by this time they would be coming together across geographic regions to come up with a policy together. No, that is not that. That didn't happen. But what has happened, and I keep talking about networks because this is where I am, we're building a network.
Yeah. And
the foundation that would typically be on the outside as the convener or the funder is now a part of a network of place-based and Black and Brown communities. And we're also not just, helping to support it. We're bringing other philanthropic partners to this network. And we're building something here that's very different. So it's not a policy. We might get there. The beautiful thing is that organizations that have not worked together are now self-organizing. Not anything that we've done, they're beginning to self-organize around leadership. I mean, like Black and Brown folks in the South on the East Coast, it's very emergent. It's very fragile right now. So we got a
Yeah.
lot of work to do. And,
Yeah.
you know, in other
Yeah.
parts of the country, we see more of that. But here in Virginia, we don't have models. And so there's a budgeting model here that's happening.
Nice.
So, but I'm not, you know, last year when I was like, well, what happened? I'm like, oh my God, you know, I couldn't, but I had to get on the balcony and then I'm saying, oh, and then map it. I had to map this thing. And then I begin to see the network. I begin to see the connection. And I'm like,
beautiful.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
Adrienne and Stephanie, what about you? What's it like being leaders of color or trying to move the systems change frameworks?
You've probably, I grew up late.
Is she coming out garbled for you?
No, she sounds like a robot.
You sound like a robot, my friend. You're having that robot thing. Let's go to Stephanie. Okay.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, it's been interesting doing the work in West Virginia, of course. So there's sort of like the public narrative about what West Virginia is and the reality of what West Virginia is. So I'm from a Black family in West Virginia. I think I'm like the 5th generation. And so there are Black people in West Virginia. Don't hear about it very much, but they are out there. And so one of the things that I started thinking about a few years ago was, how does the hub's work in communities reflect the diversity of the state? And there's a very low percentage of people of color in West Virginia. And so it's very easy to say, like, actually back to what Adrienne said before, like you check the box if you're working with one community of color, right? Because like percentage wise, that might be equal or more than the percentage of people of color in the state, but it isn't really accurately reflecting the opportunities and the needs. So we started doing some thinking about it internally and some research to really start to map out where are the communities of color in the state. And I wanted to sort of have the data that showed there are rural communities of color in West Virginia. And what was really interesting to me was like most of those communities we hadn't worked with. And so we started thinking about, well, why aren't they asking us to come work with them? Because the way the hub works with communities is we go to communities that ask us to work with them. We put a lot of work into our communications and our public relations and into just like getting out there in the state to build relationships. But it made us start to think about what are the communication pathways that we're maybe not participating in, that community leaders don't know about us. They aren't asking us to work with them. But before we could even get to that, we had to really do a lot of internal work, because when we first started having that conversation, I was the only person of color in the organization. And so there was a long period of time where we were doing a lot of work internally to examine what was going on with our hiring practices, with our systems internally, that were not attracting people of color, because we literally weren't getting any applications from people.
So nobody was parallel to the not getting the communities, that you were also not getting the applications.
I felt really strongly that we had to have staff of color as coaches to work with communities of color. And so I felt like there needed to be that representation and just diversity in the organization. And so it was a moment in time when there was a lot of pressure to just like put out a statement and move on. And we went through some periods of real tension where I was like, I'm not going to say anything. I'm not putting out a statement because we don't have anything to say. We haven't actually done the work yet to be able to have the integrity to say anything. And so we just this like summer published our racial equity journey, and we're able to map out like 2.5 years of work that we've been through to make all these changes. We've had a dramatic expansion of staff of color and coaches of color on our staff. But it's been a lot of, again, that sort of like patient, slow work because there were some real internal ingrained things that we weren't even thinking about, but they were creating systemic barriers. And then it's almost like the ice melts, you know, so once you kind of break through that ice, people start to see, oh, like this is an organization that cares about people of color. This is an organization where they want more people of color than just Stephanie at the organization. And so it's been exciting. It was really critical for me to have the support of the Fulcrum Fellowship at that time, because the Fulcrum kept requiring us to talk about racial equity every single time we got together and to be accountable to what we were doing around it. It's just not a conversation that was happening otherwise around me. So it was very easy to kind of put it aside and not think about it as the most urgent thing, because there wasn't other accountability. But at Fulcrum, it made me feel both validated that it was something that we needed to spend time on, and something that really pushed me to move maybe a little bit faster.
Thank you for that. Adrian.
So I hope this is better.
It's so much better.
Yeah, sorry, I heard the little noise that the battery was running low. So apologies for that. So I think the biggest thing for me is someone raised in the South, Black young lady leading all of these programs. One of the things that my mom continues to say, who's 86 years old, whenever I talk to her, she always goes, "Be sweet." And I think that was one of the things that I carried, probably of all of the things that she ever taught me. I would always go into a room, that sweet, happy, motivated person in the room. And what I realized in this work is that that's not always important to have. Sometimes you got to switch on the other piece. It's okay to be nice. It's okay to be sweet. But it's also important to stand in whatever it is that you're standing on, be grounded in it, ask the tough questions. Oh my gosh. Asking those tough questions and getting to the difficult conversations is something that I've really learned during the fellowship. That's where the solutions kind of break open. When you ask that tough question, that's one of the things that I've learned the most in all of the conversations that I've had while working for the Center for Community Investment, but then also working outside of that center. The more that you can have these difficult conversations, the more you're getting to those solutions that's really going to impact community.
Adrian, you bring up this piece that, I've been thinking about a lot as well, which is sort of what are the kind of dictums or commands or truths that our families kind of say to us about leadership and authority and how to be in the world, and that sometimes they don't really support us in doing the big leadership work that we're trying to do. And this Be Sweet is such a beautiful and painful example. What was it like, and what has it been like for you to be like, maybe not today. maybe sweet isn't the outfit I'm putting on today. Like, I'm going to show up in this other part of myself. What's that been like for you?
Oh, it's been hard. It's been really hard. I think there are some conversations where I know I need to have a different, this is so silly, but it's like, I need to wear something different today that's gonna really encompass that boss that's in front of you. That I need to be. Sometimes it's like the lipstick color, but whatever I have to do from that standpoint, I think is usually what I, try to do. Yeah. The other thing I would say is I map out the conversation. I think one of the things that's been really helpful is just kind of understanding what's the result of the conversation or what I'm trying to get to, so that I can kind of understand where I need to be in the room. Do I need to be the nice? Maybe start off nice, but by the end, I need to really get to that intended result. Yeah. So I think that's been really important for me to take on.
I love that.
Yeah.
So I want to open it up for questions. I know we've had a couple of questions and some comments in the chat, and happy to talk with people offline about the fellowship itself, because what we really wanted to do was kind of bring some of the learning from the fellowship about what it takes to move into systems leadership. And so I'm wondering if folks have questions or comments that they would like to make. And I know, Mia Ramirez, not to pick on you in any way, but you wrote in the chat, one of my biggest opportunities is to engage impacted people in the civic process to change the systems that have historically harmed them and continue to harm them. Relationships are key, trusted relationships, restorative relationships. Mia, is there anything else you want to say? Or should we just go straight into that question? I can't remember if people can come on and ask us questions, Justin. I think the answer is no. So let's just talk about Mia's point here about this challenge of engaging people who've been harmed to change the very systems that have harmed them. And I think all of you are doing that. And Adrian, that's sort of at the heart of your work right now. So let's start with you.
Yeah, I'm working in my home community in Tennessee. And I think one of the humbling things that have come out of this is that I came in as the problem solver. Like, I can help you. I've been doing this work for however many years. I'm going to help you. And so coming in with that savior complex and then being like kind of hit, like, wait a minute. And I think I had to be humbled a little bit to step back and really listen and learn from them instead of the problem solver hat. And I think that's been the biggest lesson in this community engagement work of, yes, I might have some idea, but it's not important for my ideas to be the main point. It's important for them to lead in their solutions.
Yeah. Other thoughts on that around helping people, supporting people to take action to change systems that actually have harmed them? They have a relationship of trauma or harm too.
Yeah, I mean, that's so deep in the Hub's work. It is basically the starting point for most communities that we work with, is this historic experience of having promises made and broken to them. And so we have to do a lot of trust building work. And the way that a mentor told me once, and the way I always think about it, is trust is gained by the thimbleful and it's lost by the bucketful. And so it is a very precious resource, and it takes a lot of time to build it up, and you have to be kind and patient with people and know that you're not going to just flip a switch and they're going to believe you and trust you and say you're going to do what you say you're going to do, because they have sometimes centuries of history showing that people don't do what they say they're going to do, or they overpromise. So we try to underpromise, overdeliver, right? So only say we're going to do what we know we can do, and then try to go beyond that, because that is what can really transform a relationship. And I have been saying recently that some of the best allies and advocates for our work are often like really traditional community leaders that are very skeptical about the value of team-based work, deep collaboration, systems-focused work. They just are they understand transactions, and they are focused on accomplishing whatever granular thing they're focused on. And but when you stay in the work with them and you keep showing up, even when they don't sometimes show up, but you just keep showing up, literally in person, showing up, and you keep at the work together, the improvements do happen. The change does happen. Like, the work actually does work. And then they completely transform. It takes them years to get there. Usually, like, what we found is 3 years. But then they become like the strongest advocates, because they're like, I didn't believe that this would work, and it did work in my community, with me too. So it's really about understanding the culture and context of the places where you are, I think, and knowing that, I mean, in every place there's an iceberg of history that we only know a little piece of, even when we understand the culture and context. And so you have to move around that iceberg, do your best, and apologize for more than you maybe feel like you're at fault for, because that's about trust building too,
That's right. Albert, do you want to add anything to this round?
I appreciate Stephanie's reflection on trust. I mean, I think when I look at Mia's comments and think about engaging, impacting people with civic process and systems, being in philanthropy, our most proximate community is the nonprofit community. And the question I asked, what is philanthropy's role in perpetuating the harms around civic engagement? And part of it is that we have a short attention span. And so we might fund 1 year, 2 years, But like, what do we need to be thinking like 5 and beyond years? Like 5 should be just the minimum in terms of the way we think about our strategy and supporting the work. So one of the things that, our foundation just really made a shift, and then COVID helped us to see this, is that we're moving away from like really project-based grant making. And so now it's mission aligned and it's multi-year general operating support grants. And, I think is, in our role, our relationship to our nonprofit partners build a certain amount of trust. I mean, like in some ways we're passing on the trauma to communities. And so like, and using our nonprofit partners as proxies, and it's like, that's got to stop. I think the challenge that I have now is that, at a relatively small regional foundation, the resource is not there. We're like, we need to track more resources. So we're just trying to figure out how to do that better. But it's not that people don't want to be engaged. It's just that we start, and it creates this scar tissue that is counterproductive. And so we really have to ask ourselves, like, how do we sustain real change in communities? And that's going to take a sustained long-term investment. And so,
any questions from the audience? And we can't see you, but we know you're there. The system tells us you're there. And if Brittany, Love, if you're still there, it would be lovely to hear from you about the changes you've made in Robeson County Church and Community Center. If you're still there, you could come off mute. I'm trying, y'all can see I'm trying to make this participatory. I'm having a hard time. All right, maybe Brittany's not there or is being shy. But in Brittany's comment, she said that that she had, oh, there she is. Yay, Brittany! Woohoo!
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Cool. Perfect. Okay. Well, we were recipients of a Casey Reynolds grant that allowed us to add in additional staff to make systems changes. Robeson County, out of 100 counties in North Carolina, has been number 100 in terms of per capita poverty rates, as well as health outcomes and lack of access to health resources. And so my job was to come in and finally be able to focus on some systemic changes that we've really needed in the community. And one of those that I'm sure a lot of you see local government officials kind of shrugging and saying, well, we knew that was an issue, but we just didn't know how to address it. And so our nonprofit has kind of shouldered that responsibility within the community and has for about 53 years now, in terms of already being the largest food pantry and diaper bank distributor in the community, but now turning towards systemic change, where we're able to look at things like permanent supportive housing and wraparound services that we're able to give people, so that it's really a whole person approach to our projects rather than one individual issue at a time, because we found that those are band-aids on problems here, and the amount of money that's being, I won't say wasted, but spent frivolously in those instances to provide redundant services that aren't really addressing a lot of the systemic nature and underlying issues that are at the base of what we see in the community. So our current focus is really on more chronically homeless and helping assist getting unhoused people off the streets, but then providing them with a basis for things like preventative health care that addresses trauma-informed care and medication management, giving them life skills curriculum like how to actually pick out healthy foods and then prepare them, instead of sending them home with a basket and saying, well, this is what someone has said is healthy, and then that individual not having any familiarity with what to do with it. So we're looking at housing and employment assistance, and then also we have a mobile unit that already goes out into our more remote community. We're also the largest county in North Carolina. So in terms of having food deserts and people that find services inaccessible, that's a huge thing that we have had to meet people where they are. And I think if that really gets to the heart of systems change. It's meeting people where they are and what they need, allowing people to finally be able to advocate for themselves that maybe have never even been told that that's an option.
Right. You're working so many levels of it, Brittany. And one thing to be thinking about is how can you get upstream, right? How can you get to like changing the resource flows? How can you get to the transportation? How can you get to the food distribution networks, right? And it's so hard because the need is so immediate. And like I have to work in this concurrent way between the immediate need and the longer term change. It's going to take a while. That's going to be like a waterfall of change eventually. But really important work. I don't know if anybody on the panel wants to kind of talk about that balance between immediate and the long term, but Brittany, it's really kind of riding that rail.
I mean, I think that's the hardest part of the work, because I mean, when you're that proximate as Brittany is, it's hard to focus on because you're seeing real human lives. We're talking about we're talking about real lives on the line here, and then being able to go upstream, maybe on the policy and the systems level. To kind of think about some of those upstream factors that have those downstream impacts. Another thought as I was hearing Brittany share. I think, and this is not just for Brittany. I think this is for all of us. The public sector is an important piece of this puzzle. And somehow or another, we have to develop our capabilities and competencies to translate some of this stuff in their language and their speak, because they have the ability to move things and think things differently as well. And so I think that's the challenge for us too, is just, they have so many other kind of priorities and the complexity is getting so challenging, it's tough. But I think moving forward, we're going to have to learn how to translate some of this work into the language that they can understand and see.
Thank you, Brittany. We have two other questions. So one is, who do we tend to forget is also in the ecosystem? And then we have another one about your career trajectory, which maybe we'll use as the closing one. So who do we tend to forget is also in the ecosystem? What have you, as one of the main things that we do in systems work is to actually take a look at who's in the ecosystem and try to extend the boundaries of who sees themselves as owning the responsibility for helping to change conditions. But who have you noticed we tend to forget is in the ecosystem?
Oh, I'll just jump right off of what Albert was saying, because one of the things that we have talked a lot about in West Virginia is the public sector and what their role is in the ecosystem. And it's not that they're not at the table, because they are a partner, but the bureaucracy moves so slow. And when the ecosystem really starts to bubble and work, we're just moving a lot faster than they can often move. And so it becomes really difficult. I mean, my whole thing has been about patience and slowing down, but it's very easy for me to do that with community leaders and volunteers that we're working with. For some reason, it's very difficult for me to do that with bureaucracy. The reason things are going slow is because of the layers of approval or review or whatever it has to go through. So it can be difficult for us to slow down what we want to do in order to engage them. But the work doesn't work without them. It really doesn't. And so I'm really kind of interested to hear what Adrienne has to say about this from her perspective. But we've really been trying to figure out what is the right pace, that makes us all work well together.
Yeah, I'm a recovering bureaucrat. And so I completely understand, and also understand that there are people in trying to really fight the good fight in the public sector, and you just have to find them. So it's a mining exercise that usually has to happen. What I was just going to mention is what I've seen is that private sector partners are usually not mapped in the ecosystem, and employers. Those are some huge pieces that I think we've put over to the side because we just know that they're there. But they could be investment partners. Residents are employees of theirs. So it's important just to include them in the conversation. And I think we give them a pass often.
Yeah. Awesome. So last question was, how has this changed your trajectory? And so maybe what is your trajectory now? How are you thinking about your long-term trajectory as leaders? And is it more career or is it more leadership trajectory that you're holding as central?
I think for me, since I'm still off mute, I think for me it's leadership, less about a career. I think I was in the career path for so long that I wanted to get to all of these places. But I think I am that one that's trying to mine the public sector folks and figure out how I can help them in their particular places, and how I can be a partner to folks that can't often be the spokespeople that we want them to be, or be the action-oriented people that we want them to be in their spaces. So for me, I think my trajectory is really just working with organizations and the leaders that are trying to do this work across the country that just needs somebody to come in and push and help and gain momentum in places where they might be feeling tired and exhausted, and they just need somebody to help them breathe. So I think for me, it's more so a leadership trajectory than a career.
What about you, Albert and Stephanie? Go ahead, Stephanie, and we'll wrap up with Albert.
I think I'm going to have to call you, Adrienne, because that sounds exactly like the kind of services I need. For me, it's been sort of surprising to find myself at the Hub for 10 straight years. And I feel like everyone is moving and changing roles and doing all these different things, and I'm just still here. And part of that is because the work is just endlessly creative. It's the most creative and flexible and interesting role that I've ever gotten to have. And so, I think for my leadership journey, it's more about the what did we say before, the long haul work, right? And getting to be in this place where I have a lot of autonomy to build that in, and the autonomy to make it literally the best organization that we can be, the most supportive, the most, the organization that looks at people as whole people and tries to make it the best that we can be. So I don't know what my journey is, but I think that it's been really surprising so far.
Thank you. And Albert, your 30-second snapshot.
Yeah, I think it's leadership for me too. I think there's no, I think the time here now, the philanthropic ecosystem enrichment is a big stock that ain't flowing in the way that it needs to flow. And so just trying to work with my peers about trying how to open up some of those choke points, but also, just lean in harder around health and racial equity. So that's what I'm about.
All right. A joy to spend time with you, my friends. That goes for Adrienne and Albert and Stephanie, and for all of you who are here in the room with us. Thank you so much. And we hope to connect with you in different ways. And you have our information, and keep going. Thank you so much for your time.
Bye.